Out of all of the science fiction authors to have emerged out of the 21st century, perhaps none is more widely recognized than Philip K. Dick. Over the course of a career that was cut short when he died at the age of 53 from a stroke in Santa Ana, California, Philip K. Dick still wrote 44 novels and 121 short stories, many of which would go on to be adapted into movies that remain some of the most celebrated films of all time. Part of what gives these stories so much staying power is the fact that they seem to increasingly describe the world in which we find ourselves. A world where artificial intelligence is on the rise, our lifestyles are dominated by machines, and technological advancements cause us to question the nature of reality itself. But how did Philip K. Dick become Philip K. Dick? December 16th, 1928, Chicago. Dorothy Kindred Dick would give birth to twins, Jane and Philip. The children were dramatically undernourished, and just 6 weeks after they were born, Jane would pass away. The event would ultimately end the marriage between Dorothy and her husband Edgar, and would plague young Philip for the rest of his life, leaving him to forever wonder if he shouldn't have been the one who died. Engraved on the headstone next to Jane's name was Phil's, which only featured a date of birth, followed by an empty space. Shortly after the tragic event, the Dicks packed up and moved to California, hoping to escape such a traumatic loss. Just after the Great Depression, Philip's father, Edgar, began working for the Department of Agriculture. The cost of livestock had been driven so low that FDR introduced the Agricultural Adjustment Act, legislation that paid farmers to kill millions of hogs and cows to artificially inflate low prices. Edgar's job required him to drive from farmstead to farmstead to make sure that farmers had actually killed the numbers of animals they had claimed. If they hadn't, he was forced to kill the animals himself on the spot. As much as his father tried to interest his son in sports, the military, and a government job, Phil remained solitary in a world of his own making. Edgar, a World War I veteran, came home one day and put on a gas mask, attempting to entertain his son, but all Phil saw was his father being transformed into some sort of terrifying alien that entirely consumed the man he thought he knew. Rather than scare Phil out of his insecurities, it merely cemented the paranoia that would come to define his writing as well as his later life. Meanwhile, Dorothy had seen enough. She divorced Edgar and took Phil to Washington, D.C. While Dorothy worked at the Federal Children's Bureau, proofing educational pamphlets, Phil went to school at the conservative Quaker Academy, where the children were encouraged to sit quietly in circles and wait patiently to come face to face with the direct presence of God. The experience instilled in Phil an insatiable appetite for knowledge of the divine. On the rare occasions where his mother would be home before he was asleep, they would watch silent films about the persecutions of the Christians under the Roman Empire. But often left at home alone at night for hours, Phil was forced to come up with his own bedtime stories, where he would sit underneath the kitchen table and imagine himself to be a secret Christian hiding from the Romans. But their time in D.C. wouldn't last long, and soon enough, yearning for the progressive ideals of the West Coast, Dorothy would find herself taking a job at the U.S. Forestry Department at UC Berkeley, and they would return to California once more. By the time Phil and his mother had resettled in Berkeley, it was no secret to Dorothy that her son was different. He would regularly fake illness to avoid playing sports with other kids, preferring instead to conjure up fantastic worlds he could only visit in his mind. And for her part, Dorothy mostly seemed to encourage this, happy to see her son take an artistic bent that reminded her less of her ex-husband and more of her own progressive influence. She encouraged Phil to write what he saw, and so he wrote dramatic stories about a battalion of ants attacking a giant bumblebee and found the extraordinary in the ordinary and in the world around him. But being the only child, when he knew deep down that he was not, had a lasting impact on Phil's psyche. Occasionally, Jane would visit him, when he was hiking the hills during the day or lying half asleep in bed at night. And on one occasion, when Phil made a mess of the apartment trying to act out a storyline, his mother allegedly blurted out, "I wish you were the one that was dead." The weight of this physical connection to the other side of life would become part of Phil's access to the unknown. Later, Phil would famously define reality as that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. We might stop believing in fantastic worlds, but that doesn't mean they will let go of us. And to set his fate into motion in a way that could not be reversed, Dorothy bought young Phil a typewriter, the first and only machine that would change the course of his life and facilitate the inner workings of a mind desperately seeking to understand the world around him. This was the birth of a writer many would come to know and love. This was the beginning of the elaborate world-building mind of Philip K. Dick.